Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John.
How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing awesome. Hope you are.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. And I'm doing especially well because I'm fired up about today's topic, part six of our look back on our new normal series from last year. And today we're going to discuss a comparison to past new normals, uh, times in recent history where we thought, man, this time is really different. It's dark before dawn, all that stuff. Bad things happen, black swan events, and try to compare what we learned from the previous ones and maybe see how it compares to the COVID-19 pandemic. Fair enough?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, this is less a prediction and more just kind of our observations. David McGrath
Yeah.
down in Mobile and myself actually wrote a two-part part on this, 6A and 6B actually in the magazine. But, we focus really kind of on three sort of, I don't know, other new normals. One right after the Y2K, another one right after 9/11, and then one after 2008. Now, Sam, I told you I'd talk a little bit about Y2K because I remember it very well. I'm a little bit older than you are.
Yeah,
And
just a few years, and I was about 3.5 when this was really a thing. So I'll lean on you on this one a little bit.
Fair enough. Let's face it, it was 20. It sounds crazy, but now it's 22 years ago. For those people that remember sitting there saying, man, it's 22 years ago since we were worried about Y2K, 1999. But, really the world was all in a furor because back in the early 1970s, in order to save some space on binary code, computer programmers just left out a couple of digits and, running up to year 2000, everyone was very concerned that their computers would kick back to 1900 as opposed to 2000, and that was supposed to throw everything into a dither. Corporate America spent, untold millions, billions of dollars on upgrading their computing technology. The previous employer where I worked at the time, seriously, Sam, people were running on 386s, 486s, which might be Greek to you, but they're very slow Pentium chips from Pentium. Now they're just Intel chips. And where I worked, there was a mimeograph machine, that type of thing. And there were people that actually did not have computers, but running up into Y2K, it seemed just be cheaper to just buy everyone a whole bunch of technology. At first, we tried to get these people to come in and do a little bit of work on our computers, and you got a green sticker that said Y2K compliant. But then, after 12/31/1999, when the world didn't fall into the sea and Tonga, I think, was the first country, it didn't explode, and we still had running water, all that stuff. It turned out the Y2K was kind of a fizzle. We had a 2-year time frame where all of a sudden everything was a little bit different. We had spent a ton of money on technology. There was this thing called the internet that all of a sudden people were getting all fired up about. And Sam, this is going to be kind of crazy. Take a listen to this. In 1997, only 18% of U.S. households had access to the internet. 1997. What do you think about that?
Pretty low, especially comparing it to where we are now, where everything runs on the internet.
And in 2000, that number had surged to 41.5%. But then by 2010, internet usage had grown to 76.7%. So because of all of the increase in expenditures and technology corporate America did, and even individual consumers, all of a sudden we had this huge surge and just internet usage, increased reliance on technology. In order to stave off a recession after the Y2K, the Federal Reserve kept the overnight lending target low for a long period of time, very steep yield curve. And, we had a very mild recession, truthfully, as far as recessions are concerned, very mild recession, but that didn't mean the stock market liked it. The stock market fell apart really in 2000, 2001, and 2002, just due to the absurd valuations that we got on a lot of tech stocks in 98 and 99, the so-called tech bubble, where all you really needed to have was .com in your company's name and maybe a line of credit from the bank, and you were a multimillionaire. So, but, in terms of that new normal, well, the new normal was, gee whiz, we're going to spend more money on technology, and we're also going to count on the Federal Reserve to bail us out over and over again. So that was really kind of the takeaway from Y2K. More technology, more reliance on the federal government to keep us from realizing the recession that perhaps we could have or should have had. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and a lot of the crash that we had, I guess, wasn't necessarily. I guess it was if you're looking at it from the top of it, but when you're looking at it from a 2 or 3 year time horizon, it's kind of just getting back to normal, back to where it should be,
Yeah.
because they had just run up so much. I mean, the Nasdaq soared in late '99 from around 2,600 to over 5,000 in October of 1999. So I mean, or in March of 2000. So I mean, it was an incredible run up. And they say what goes up must come down. And I think once we realized that, okay, Y2K wasn't as big of a deal as some people feared that it may be, we wouldn't have all these companies being profitable, the sales that these companies had, kind of like you mentioned, tech companies coming in and fixing things for one quarter. That is not a new perpetual growth rate. That was actually a short-term blip. And once they're back to normal, back to a more normal growth rate, and a lot of these companies dying off, that's what we saw as the valuations come back down to a more normal level.
Well, that's right. And then I'd kind of go on to the next new normal, if you will, was 9/11. Just a couple of years after Y2K, September 11th, 2001, when the Islamic terrorists took down the Twin Towers. And really, Sam, it shut down the financial industry in the United States for a while. But really, and I wrote this in the magazine, New York clearly got the worst of it. I mean, obviously, not just figuratively, but literally got the worst of it. Here in central Alabama, where I was living at the time, life kind of went on. It was, looking out the window, the economy in Birmingham at the time was actually pretty good. But even so, consumer activity in September, October, and November 2001 fell through the floor. A lot of concerns about increased terrorism, put all kinds of restrictions on travel, particularly air travel. My children don't remember a time really where you could just kind of show up at the gate to catch your flight. Where people would try to get there 5 minutes before the flight left because they didn't want to go stand in line. Where the screening was a joke. Where friends and loved ones could wait for you at the gate. I mean, all that type of stuff. All of that changed. And also what changed during that time frame was really kind of maybe our mindset. We felt a little bit less safe. We felt a little bit more scared, a little bit more apprehensive. Even so, I would say the coming out of it, the Federal Reserve again just kept its foot on the gas, kept on making sure that there's enough liquidity. I mean, literally shipped hundreds of millions, if not billions, of physical dollars to their various Federal Reserve banks and their branches. I mean, out there really in Liberty Park, actually the Federal Reserve, I think, was downtown at the time. They literally moved in pallets of cash, just to make sure that there was enough money in order to keep everything going. So, increased dependence there on the Federal Reserve, and then also increased usage of technology, which was really kind of residue from Y2K. So again, with normal, this is kind of more of a black swan event, sort of like the pandemic currently is. But another thing we learned was, hey, we're going to rely on the Federal Reserve and the government even more in order to keep us from being hurt. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those things that we still talk about it. How's the Federal Reserve going to get out of this, or how the situation we've been put in, and it really is a decade-long situation and a decades-long problem of, okay, we started this, people just need more, it's just a little bit more liquidity, it's just a little bit more backstop. And the Federal Reserve, I mean, that's what they've done over the past couple of decades, and what it does is it helps provide this exuberance to the market and this excess confidence to the market that, okay, stuff really gets bad, someone else is going to step in, and I'm not going to have to bear the full brunt of any sort of economic downturn. And I think that's something that we've seen both in the early 2000s and even a couple decades before. They're even calling it the Powell put now, but different Federal Reserve chairs coming in and stepping in and really keeping the market afloat. So we definitely saw a lot of this in the early 2000s, and a lot of this excess confidence that has stayed in the market and leads us kind of into our next comparison being 2008.
Yeah, and why don't you tackle that one, my friend? Talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
I mean,
2008. Yeah.
I mean, we Y2K 9/11 has some, I think some distinct characteristics that we can look at to really show some similarities between it and the current pandemic, just it being kind of a black swan event and exogenous thing. And then we look at 2008, and it was really just a more traditional uh, recession. I mean, obviously, it was a big one. It was the biggest since the Great Depression. However, it had this typical overheating to areas of the economy, banks levering up too much, and really just this overheating, over exuberance that you could argue had been caused by years of backstop in different markets of low rates, people being able to go out and buy houses and get a loan to value of over 100% without pretty much any income. And it was just this frothy market. People were loaning out money. People were buying things they shouldn't buy. Jokingly called them ninja loans. There's no income, no job, and you'd still get a loan to go out and buy a house. And so, but I think the important part of this is what we kind of talked about just a second ago with the Federal Reserve and the impact that they have and have had for several decades in leading to exuberance in markets and leading to possible overheating by just an inability to kind of slow things down at the right times and to have some sort of smooth landing. You drop rates to let the market kind of heat up and get nice and a lot of economic growth, and then they start to hopefully taper it back. And I think they just haven't clearly been that successful of doing that, of slowing things down before things overheat too much. So um, this was obviously a very bad one, and it set off a period of very low rates that has maybe played a part in the current one too. I get the pandemic itself, but we had rate issues even before the pandemic started. So it's kind of been a long time coming, the current situation we're in, and most of that I would say is due to the 2008 collapse.
Well, a lot of truth there. A lot of truth. You're hitting a lot of nails on a lot of heads there. And the thing about the 2008 financial crisis and the ultimate collapse, almost collapse of the financial system, and we were very close. If people realized just how close the FDIC came to running completely out of money, I mean, they'd be a little bit scared. But this was bad news. I mean, it really was. And the thing is, everyone points their fingers at the banks. I mean, and understandably so. No one really likes bankers. I mean, it just maybe we deserve the reputation as being money grubbers. But even so, it wasn't just the banks, it was everyone. I mean, the entire economy and the entire society was all wrapped up in this. And the Federal Reserve had kept its foot on the gas way too long. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and others had developed far looser lending standards or credit criteria in order to get more people into homes. The insurance agencies were just gobbling up all this paper. Mortgage brokers were making mortgages and selling them. The banks were flipping them, and Wall Street was securitizing them. There's a complete attempt to disintermediate risk throughout the system, and the ratings organizations were putting investment grade ratings on a lot of this stuff. So investors and insurance companies were just gobbling this up. It was all going to work brilliantly until all of a sudden it didn't. And when it didn't, really, everything came tumbling down.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like hot potato, who cares if I underwrite a loan, because I'm just going to dish it off and package it off and somebody else will be holding the bag on that. Then we'll throw it in with thousands of others and label it AAA and have thousands of other investors, kind of backstop it. So why not give this person a loan that maybe can't afford it? And again, these low rates and easy money and real no serious backstops on or guardrails maybe to prevent this excess, this just general excess. It just gets too hot, and what goes up must come down. But I think something worth talking about with this was kind of the worst recession since the Great Depression.
Mhm.
But unemployment peaked at about 9.9%.
That's right.
And that's pretty strong. That's pretty bad levels of unemployment. But then I think it's so crazy to compare it to how quickly and how sharply the unemployment rose during the pandemic. I mean, we saw, month over month over month, millions of jobs being lost and getting well into the double digits of unemployment well worse than the worst levels of what is a consensus the worst recession since the 1940s. So I think that's just an interesting look back comparing what we're going through now to then. And obviously the a lot of it is the type of jobs being lost. Some come back quicker than others, but even just in absolute terms, I mean, we have well outkicked the worst unemployment levels that we saw in 2009.
Yeah, and I would say that's kind of taking to kind of this point, really, in comparison to other sort of new normals. This one's a little bit different in the fact that never in our nation's history, to my estimation, has government at all levels mandated or otherwise recommended the shutting down of our economy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what makes this so different and so strange, and why the data looked really weird. I thought 2008 was going to be 2008 and 2009 really was going to be the worst economic downturn in my career, and I was wrong. The worst economic downturn in my career was the second quarter of last year.
Yeah.
But it's bounced back. And so what makes this a little bit different is we didn't really see this coming. Obviously, I mean, at the end of 2019, no one saw this coming. No one anticipated that some variant coronavirus from Wuhan area in China was going to shut down the global economy, that politicians were going to willingly shut down their economies, and what are business owners supposed to do when the government says you can't be open?
Yeah.
Obviously they get rid of folks. No matter how much money you throw at it, business owners need to have revenue coming in. They just can't sit there and say, okay, I got my PPP loan. Okay, well, that's great, but I still need to have revenue in order to pay the landlord, pay my utilities, payroll, all of it. I mean, there's a lot of money that business owners just couldn't replicate, even with the PPP program. So that's what I think is a little bit different about this particular black swan event. We didn't see the black swan coming. Now, in hindsight, we should have seen the 2008 black swan coming. I mean,
and some people did.
Yeah, well, some people, we saw The Big Short, right? But I mean, that black swan was swimming right at us.
Yeah.
The black swan was swimming right at us in 1999. Well, of course, we're not going to spend as much money on technology after Y2K because we spent a fortune on it leading up to it. We saw that black swan coming. We saw that black swan coming in 2008. We didn't really see the black swan coming on 9/11. However, we knew that it was swimming around in the pool somewhere. My wife called me on the telephone. I was down working at a previous employer and said, turn on the TV. Well, the TV was already on. I just wasn't in the room. She goes, they finally got the Twin Towers. She didn't need to say that. We all knew it was terrorists that got it. It wasn't the Boston Red Sox. Wasn't the Auburn Tigers. I mean, we knew who got it. So this one's a little bit different in the fact that, in hindsight, okay, maybe a pandemic's going to happen, but no one was prepared for this. And we made a bunch of ham-handed decisions at the state and local level to really ruin people's economic futures. And I still think that the cost of that far outweighed the benefit of shutting things down.
And that's another, I think, good point or interesting point is, 2008, when we're coming out of this, we hit the lows of unemployment and all the measurements, but then we go, okay, how do we get out of this? There wasn't some kind of necessarily easy way. The financial system was crippled in a lot of ways, and a lot of the jobs lost weren't necessarily jobs that come back super quickly, and there wasn't some turnkey answer of how we get out of it, where right now I feel like I'm not going to debate lockdowns for some point in time, but there was a little more of a turnkey answer of, okay, how do we get our economy back up and running? It's a lot shorter. Yeah, it's a lot shorter answer than how do we get our economy back up and running when you're talking about early 2009. So that's, I think, kind of the big difference. And then there's just the debate of, like you mentioned, do the costs outweigh the benefits of reopening these economies? And so it's interesting.
No, it is interesting. However, I would say this new normal has something very much in common with the other new normals that we've discussed, and that is reliance on the Federal Reserve and the government to make things right for us. I mean, take a look at what the Federal Reserve and Washington has done over the last 12 to 14 months. the Federal Reserve has increased its balance sheet by what, 3.3 trillion?
Yeah.
Pretty much said it was going to backstop the corporate bond market.
Yep.
Pretty much ensures that there's enough liquidity in the financial system. Washington does the $2 trillion CARES Act last year, an additional $900 billion in December, along with another $1.4 trillion spending bill, if memory serves. And then they just passed another $1.9 trillion. And there's rumors of another $2 trillion there about the infrastructure bill. I mean, we are reliant on the government, truthfully, to keep us from hurting ourselves. And in truth, in this go around, the government calls the pay. So it should bail us out. But even so, we've gotten so used to the Federal Reserve coming in, particularly the Federal Reserve, coming in and making sure that everything's okay. I'm scared that the next time we have another new normal, we're just going to continue to rely on the Federal Reserve to keep on wallpapering over the problem. Sam, your thoughts?
I mean, it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue that we haven't started some sort of universal basic income either. I mean, seriously though, I mean, do you think people, anytime there's some sort of slowdown now, in 2008, 2009, or the TARP package, what was passed was unfathomable, the amount of money that we spent at the time. And we've just passed double that without much debate on it.
More than that.
Yeah, I'm just saying in this last bill, we passed close to double that without much serious debate on it.
2 hours worth of debate, I think.
Yeah. And so that's the difference is, it's kind of once you open the gates, you can't really close it. You can't fit the toothpaste back in once it comes out. And the expectation level that people have, we can just hand out money. I mean, that seems like it would have been unfathomable a decade ago to say, things are slowing down a little. Let's just write every single American a $1,400 check right now. Unfathomable. But now we've done it 3 times and we're getting so efficient at it that a few days after the bill's passed, it's deposited in people's accounts. And so the level of expectation, the level that people expect from the government to come in and just throw money at it is just exorbitant now. And there's no way in my mind that you reverse that.
Well, I think you're right on that. And to show you just how much people have come to rely on this, I read an article yesterday about how certain bank customers are irate that they have to wait a day in order for their bank to process their wire.
Yep.
I mean, just absolute. I mean, closing down their accounts because they have to wait a day.
Yep.
I mean, that's how reliant we are on this.
Yeah.
I would say another thing that this new normal has in common with other new normals is just increased use of technology. I mean, take a look at what we've done with remote working, take a look at Zoom calls, all that stuff. Every time we have one of these shutdowns, we use more technology. Corporate America arguably gets a little bit more efficient, maybe not as efficient as we would like, and we continue to rely on the government to keep us from hurting our boobies.
I agree.
All right, so maybe this new normal isn't quite as different as previous new normals, and the fact that there are some things in common with it. Even so, this is a weird black swan event because we didn't see the black swan coming. And that's what makes this one a little bit different from the previous time, even if the end result is going to be eerily the same. More government and more technology. Sam.
I mean, I agree. That's the long-term trend, and this isn't any different. And the next kind of big event probably isn't going to be any different.
All right, guys. Well, thank y'all so much for listening. We've gone on a little bit long here today, and we apologize for it, but Sam and I were on a roll. At least we thought we were on a roll.
Oh, yeah.
As always, we love to hear from you all. So if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, drop us a line, an email at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com. If you want to read more, listen more to what we have to say or how we think, by all means, go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab. All kinds of good articles and information there. Sam, as always, going to give you a last look.
That's it. That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.